What are you thankful for on day 11 of 30 Days of Thanks? And what do you do when you wake up looking at a face that big and there's ribbon candy in the sky? It was April of 1973, and I had only been in Fairbanks, Alaska for just a couple days. And I decided I wanted to get in my first workout because I loved Olympic lifting and I wanted to go to the gym. Well, we had just gotten an apartment on University Avenue, and I said, I think I'll head over to the University of Alaska and find out what they've got over there. So I headed over there and found a little weight room. There was one other person in the weight room. His name was Doug. Doug and I became immediate friends. He had a beard, looked like a true Alaskan, although he had come in from the state of Washington and arrived there and was living like a lumberjack out in a little cabin, he told me. So we had a great workout. I did my deadlifts, my cleans. He did his lifting. We had a good time chatting, and then he said, hey, would you like to come over to the house and see what we've got? Maybe enjoy a little food, a little moose meat. I thought, moose meat? I've never had moose meat. So sure enough, got in the car. We headed down a road not too far from the university, a little road called Chena Pump Road. And we went about a mile down Chena Pump Road and pulled over to the side and parked. He said, come this way. We crossed the street. We began walking down a little path in the snow. It was very cold. And as we walked down the path, we came to a creek, a little creek, and we crossed over the creek and continued down the path. We went into a white birch grove in the middle of nowhere on squatters' land at the University of Alaska. And there, in the middle of the little birch grove, was a little tiny cabin. Just one room. Looked like a Hansel and Gretel house. Doug went over to the door, opened it up, and it had padding on it that thick as he opened the door. And inside that room was a little lady, a beautiful young woman in her early 20s, an Inuit woman. And she was a doll, and she was a sweetheart. Her name was Lena, and Doug was deeply in love with her, and she with him. We got to know each other that day, and they cooked up some nice moose meat. We sat down and we ate it. It was very good. Talked in that little room. I looked around and I thought, you know, this is all a man really needs, is a little room like this, a nice little stove, can keep real warm with the insulation, beautiful artistic design. Had been built by a squatter who came there and built the little cabin, and they had just passed it on from one person to the next. I left that night real happy. One day in late May 1973 in Fairbanks, not far from Fort Wainwright, I decided to take a little walk down Noble Street and go over to 2nd and check out what the taverns were like downtown. 2nd Street was notorious. I had heard about it. I thought I'd check it out. So I went into different places, and I ended up in this place close to the Savoy bar called the Chena. And the Chena was where all of the natives hung out, and the GIs. A lot of them would go there to hang out. And it was a wild place. It was crazy, and it got crazy sometimes, so crazy that it was dangerous just to be in there. I found this place called the Chena Bar. And the Chena Bar was the place where all of the natives hung out. It was a great place to meet the native people. And I had a wonderful time that first night. I met a lot of different people. But there was this one lady who was particularly interested because she was very innocent, very wonderful, very expressive, and very friendly. Her name was Priscilla. And Priscilla took an instant liking to me. It was like a friendship that would never end. We became very close friends that night. In all of my time in Alaska, whenever I would come into town and she'd see me, she would light up like a Christmas tree. Priscilla was a wonderful woman. And I'm going to tell you a story tomorrow about what happened in Fairbanks, Alaska, and the role that Priscilla played in my life. I returned to the cabin one afternoon looking for Doug, and Lena was there all by herself. Doug had left. He was gone. She was heartbroken. She cried and cried and cried, and I consoled her and left. Shortly thereafter, I ran into Lena downtown, and we started to become friends. And we would go places together and joke and laugh and have fun. It was never a romantic relationship, but it was a good friendship. And we went and explored places, and she shared her history with me. And we'd talk about food, and we'd talk about survival. And she says, I'll never worry about survival. She says, I don't need stores. She says, I've grown up living off the land. She says, I can find things to eat in the woods. And she could. She was an extremely resourceful Eskimo woman, Inuit. And that began a wonderful experience of me going to different towns and experiencing the Alouettes, the Athabascans, the different Indian tribes in Alaska. And that began a journey of me visiting all of the tribes in Alaska, getting invited to go to their towns, to Nome, to Unalakleet, to Stebbins, and all of the other little towns. It's a wonderful experience to have people love you so much and to be accepted by a people that were so kind and so generous. After we finished unloading the airplane, what we'd do is we'd go into town and go to the China Bar. And we'd hang out at the China Bar and we'd shoot pool. And what would happen is all these fights would break out. There was a lot of drinking going on. And the thing about Alaska in those days was that when you got into a fight, God forbid, it would be to the end. People would not give up until they knocked you out. What a terrible experience. I hated it. Fortunately, I knew a little bit about what I was doing, was able to win each fight I was in. Thank goodness, because the people who lost, I'll tell you, talk about people being ripped apart. It was a terrible experience and something I never want to experience again. So I went by the cabin one day to visit Lena, and there was somebody else there. A man named Gerard was there. And I asked where Lena was. He says, well, Lena left. She gave the cabin to me. I said, oh, well, I'm Bob. He goes, Gerard, glad to meet you. So what do you do, Gerard? He says, well, I'm a mountain climber. A mountain climber? He says, yes, that's what I do. I climb mountains and I travel throughout the United States. And he began to tell me of all the different places he had been. And he was explaining how he'd climbed the mountains and what he had experienced was when he was in these different parks. And he says, but the favorite park, my favorite, is the Black Canyon of the Gunnison River. And he began to describe the Black Canyon of the Gunnison River, and I became enormously interested. And then, just a year later, I was to experience something at the Gunnison River that would change my life, and I'll share that story with you tomorrow. I went to the cabin to visit Gerard, and when I was there, his girlfriend was with him. They had gotten together and decided they were going to move out of the cabin and build a geodesic dome. Like Buckminster, anyway, they were going to build this, so they were going to build this geodesic dome. And I said, well, what are you going to do with the cabin? They says, well, we were thinking we'd give it to you. I said, wow, I like that. So I went ahead and started moving my things into the cabin. I was still in the Army at the time, but when I'd leave the Army at night, I'd go ahead and go home to the cabin. And what a wonderful time I had there. During that summer, I cut up all my wood with my friend John Martin. We cut a lot of wood, got enough to last the whole winter. And then as the winter moved in, we'd settle into the cabin and have a great time. Part-time, I would go out and work for Pan American. We'd go out and we'd unload everything out of the plane, change all of the seats, get the mail out, and get everything ready for the flight to go on from Tokyo and now on to New York. It was January of 1974, and it was a cold night. I went out to the parking lot where my car was parked, and I took the thermometer and put it on the ground, and it came back 52 degrees below zero. And I put the thermometer down and stepped outside the car, and I looked up in the sky, and there started a light show, the Aurora Borealis. It started off with just one little light, and then became shooting beams, like ribbon candy, just coming in and coming out, and then changing colors, and then going out and going in, and waving over all these different waves. And for the next half hour, this light show went on, and it was never the same twice. Every time you see the Aurora Borealis, it's different. It's never the same. It's the most amazing experience I have ever seen in my life. What a wonderful, wonderful, colorful, beautiful display of God's power and grace. We had just finished unloading the Pan American plane, and it was time to go home. So I got in my car, went over to the University of Alaska, and plugged it in so that the circulating heater could work all night and the block of the engine wouldn't freeze out. It was more than 40 degrees below zero, which was not extremely cold for Alaska. It got even much colder than that. But on this particular night, as I was walking home back to my cabin, because it was below 40 degrees, I started to freeze up. It was a mile walk to my cabin, and as I was walking to the cabin, I got about a half a mile down the road, and my body felt like it couldn't go any further. The pain was starting to set in. My body was starting to freeze. And I can remember praying in my heart that I could make it, and I prayed to God. I said, God, just please help me to make it to the cabin. And every step I took for the next half a mile was so painful, and I knew if I stopped, I'd be dead. And I just kept moving one foot, going one after the next. And that went on. It seemed like an eternity. Finally got to the turnoff of the cabin where there was less than a quarter of a mile to go to get to my cabin. And I began walking towards the cabin, crossed the creek, over to the door, opened the door, found a way to strike a match, to light up the fire, and within 15 minutes, I was okay. I want to tell you that the things that took place in Fairbanks, in the bars, was a part of my life I never want to return to. I only share them with you so that you'll understand why I talk the way I talk today and why I believe so firmly in God. But I'm going to tell you a story tomorrow on day 12 about how it finally came down to where I had to make some changes. My life was just really in trouble. In 28 AD, Jesus had been traveling throughout Galilee to the different towns and healing the sick in many different ways. And the word began to spread and people began to come in multitudes from Syria, from Samaria, from Decapolis, from beyond the Jordan, even Jerusalem, to listen to Jesus and also to be healed by Jesus. And so Jesus went up onto the mountain with his disciples, and he turned and he began to teach the multitude. Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Poor in spirit, feeling like you're down, it's just not working. You never have enough to get what you need, it seems. You struggle in life. You have a hard time, perhaps, paying your bills, or maybe getting the medical care that you need, and your spirit's busted. You just feel like nothing's going to get easy. It's hard, and life sometimes can be that way. And certainly in the day of Jesus, it was that way for many, many people. But yours is the kingdom of heaven. If you will hang on and just trust and believe in the Lord, He loves you and He wants to give you what you need. And this world is going to pass away. You might be here for 50 years, 70 years, 100 years. But hang on and trust. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. What a sad thing it is to see somebody die, perhaps a child, perhaps your own father or mother or brother or sister, or to see somebody hurt, an accident, or somebody is terribly hurt, bleeding, broken bones, working for everything that you need, and all of a sudden things start to fall apart, and you're hurt, and you want so badly to succeed, but it's just not happening, and you mourn. But you shall be comforted if you trust the Lord, because He sees your every hurt, your every pain, your every desire to see things be better. Blessed are you if you mourn, if you trust in the Lord. This will all pass away one day, and you will be comforted. Jesus went on to say, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." You see, there's going to come a day when Jesus does come back, and it's not going to be the proud of heart that inherits the earth. It's going to be those who understand who they are in relationship to God, who they are in relationship to each other, and how we really are a brother and sisterhood. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Jesus went on to say to all of these people, many of which were sick, ailing, suffering from heartache, He says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled." We live in a world, and always have lived in a world, where there are people who exploit other people, who think that they have to have all the goodies, who keep manipulating things so that everything falls into their hands, not caring about the poor, not caring about those people who suffer to pay the rent, suffer because the prices keep going up and up and up, and exploitation And there are many people who try to do it righteously. But then there are the other people who don't care whether it's righteous or not. They just want to get all that they can get because it's all about them. Jesus said, don't be concerned about that. Hunger, if you hunger and thirst for righteousness, you will be filled. God will see to it that you are filled. God's timing is not our timing. Sometimes God gives us what we need right now. Sometimes we have to wait. Sometimes he teaches us patience, because the quality and the nature of men and women is more important to God than what we have. He wants us to learn how to value the values that are God's. And in this suffering sometimes comes the learning, because part of that learning is understanding that God is eternal. God is everlasting. God is not limited to this time zone. God can give us everything. God says that he will give us everything if we hunger and thirst for righteousness. Oh yes, the words of Jesus were wonderful that day on the mountain, full of wonder. He turned to the people and he said, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy." Somebody wrongs you, or somebody has done something terrible, and they're sorry. They wish they had not. Don't look for revenge. Have mercy. Understand that they're human. Understand that God forgives you. God forgives you. God is merciful towards you. God gives us the rain. He gives us the sunshine. He gives us the clouds, the sea, the food, the love, the comfort, the warmth, the shelter. God is merciful to us. Let us be merciful to others. Again, Jesus said to the multitude, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." When we look at different conditions, whether it be political or economic, maybe it has to do with the environment, maybe it has to do with a person's living standards, maybe it has to do with understanding the way they dress, or the way they wear their hair, the way they treat their skin. Are we pure in heart when we look at those people? Are we pure in heart when we look at the environment? Are we pure in heart when we look at the needs of our bosses, the people who look after us? Are we pure in heart when we think of our leaders? Are we pure in heart when we think of the people who follow us? If we are, we'll see God, because God certainly sees us. Again, Jesus turned to the multitude on the mountain. Many, many people coming from all over, all different types of people, Syrians, Samaritans, Judeans, Galileans, people from beyond the Jordan, all these different nationalities. Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God." Peacemakers. Peacemakers. It was August of 1973, and I was asleep on top of my little bed in the cabin. And to the left of me was this window that had two plastic pieces. One of them was in place, and the other one was a slider, and you could pull the slider out. It was simple. You could just knock it over and somebody could come right in. But I didn't care because I had my stove there with plenty of heat on, always kept it lots of wood, and I was comfortable. And I'd sleep in my little cabin, and in August it wasn't too cold, even in Alaska. But on this day when I woke up, I turned, and there staring at me with a head this big was a grizzly bear. His eyes were about 4 inches away from mine as he looked into that plastic piece with his big head. And I'm looking into the eyes of the grizzly bear, and he's looking into my eyes, and we're both in shock. And I'm thinking, I hope he doesn't know that all he has to do is tap that little window and eat me if he wants to. But he just stared at me. And for about 15 to 20 seconds, we just stared in each other's eyes. And then he got back down off of 2 legs onto all 4 and just walked away. And we never saw each other ever again. It was now October of 1974, and I loved my little cabin. I had come to really love Alaska. I had been all over, had driven down every road I could go, had been to Valdez, Anchorage, Mont Denali, the Wrangell Mountains, Tok, North, East, Stebbins, Unalakleet, Nome, you name it. If I could go there, I did. This was a sad day for me. Something had happened. I'm going to tell you about that tomorrow. Something had happened. And at 5 o'clock in the morning, I headed to my little cabin. But I didn't go to bed. I packed everything up, emptied out my little cabin, took everything I owned, took it out, down the path, over the creek, never to see the cabin again. It's a sad day. And they said, "Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you, and say all kinds of evil things against you, falsely, for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven.